Hello and welcome to our presentation on the Catholic Curriculum Corporation resource for They Shall Be Comforted, Accompanying the Bereaved in Our Catholic Schools. I'm Kelly Pickard-Lefters. I'm a consultant of religious education, family life, equity, and adult faith at York Catholic District School Board. And with me today is...
My name is Michelle Prinzo. I'm the mental health lead at the York Catholic District School Board. Welcome.
So the background of our project and how it got started. So the Faith and Education Table, which is a collection of our gathering of religious education consultants across Ontario, recognized that bereavement support resources in many of our boards needed an update. It was acknowledged that many of our current resources didn't respect the diversity of the communities that we serve, and they didn't really take into account things that the 21st century has changed for us. We also recognized that pastoral care providers needed practical resources, which are beyond the scope of most of our crisis response documents. We felt that there was a need for a deeper understanding of Catholic teachings as they relate to bereavement. And finally, we wanted to ensure that our resource embedded trauma-informed practices for school staff who may not be part of some of the trauma-informed training that has been done for board level staff. And so we formed a writing team and brought together a number of people who represented various boards and various roles. And they included Tara Cakebread from Huron-Perth, who's currently in the role of vice principal, but has been in the role of a religion consultant, as well as Nancy Davey, who is a religion consultant at York Catholic, Shannon Aljadi, who is both a secondary religion consultant, Indigenous lead, and former secondary school chaplain, and of course, Michelle Prinzo, who's with me today as our mental health lead. And then we had reviewers, Carrie Calvsbert, who's a consultant at Brandon Holt Norfolk, and Murray Watson from Simcoe Muskoka, who is an adult faith animator. And the resource for They Shall Be Comforted, a Google site, was created. So what the resource is and is not. So it's a Catholic online resource that provides pastoral planning resources for school staff and board staff. It is mindful of the diversity of our communities. It's informed by mental health professionals. It's a source for classroom activities and prayer services, practical things like that. And it provides suggestions and considerations for people in various roles. It is not a substitute for our board crisis response documents, nor is it a mental health resource. So initial reviews from Murray Watson and Carrie Calvsbert, who we brought on as our project reviewers, were very positive. They were really excited about the resources that were created and their ability to easily access them on our Google site. And of course, we've also collated the resource into a folder of PDFs with links to other outside web pages and documents that are in our Google environment here at York Catholic. So people who can't access the Google site can still take advantage of this resource. The Google site will be posted to the Catholic Curriculum Corporation and should be available now. As well, the folder of activities will be linked to the Catholic Curriculum Corporation website for those who would like to access it that way. So the first page of our Google site that I would like to draw your attention to is grief and the role of faith. One of the things that we have incorporated here is the idea of being an Easter people and what the experience of grief means to those of us who believe in the resurrection. Despite our knowledge of the eternal life in heaven, we still experience grief like anyone else does. And so there we've considered that and provided some suggestions for caregivers to incorporate those Catholic understandings. We've also provided information and of course, the arrow here is drawing your attention to a number of these sub pages that are in this section. So in each section, there may be the main page and then also sub pages that you'll want to click on to find additional information. So this page also provides information on what is grief and how we understand grief within our Catholic context. It also references the Indigenous experience and how the experience of shared and intergenerational trauma may impact how our Indigenous community members might experience grief. It also speaks to pastoral care and what that is, and how we, as school staff, can engage in pastoral care for the bereaved. Finally, there are a number of pieces on the Catholic teachings surrounding death and dying, death and the afterlife, burial and cremation, saints and angels, the role of suffering, and heaven and pets. And the purpose for this is because often teachers may get questions from students around these pieces. You know, my puppy died. Will my puppy go to heaven? You know, my mommy says that grandma's an angel in heaven now. And sometimes we don't know how to answer those questions. And so we've provided ways that we can answer the questions in a way that honors our Catholic understandings, but at the same time is pastoral, so that we're not correcting students who have been given something that comforts them during the loss of a loved one.
So before we get a little bit more into depth in terms of the pastoral plan and some of the other resources that we've provided on the site, we thought it would be important to understand trauma and ensure that we bring a trauma-informed lens to our practices. Trauma can be the result from a recent single traumatic event, a single traumatic event that happened in the past, or it can be a long-term chronic pattern. So because of these different ways that trauma can manifest and affect our students and our families and our communities, using a trauma-informed approach is best when supporting our students during these difficult times. Trauma-informed approaches are not about treating the trauma. Instead, the focus is to minimize the potential harm and re-traumatization, and to enhance safety, control, and resilience. In the end, these approaches benefit everyone, whether or not they've actually experienced the trauma in their own lives or their personal history is known to us as providers and supporters. Our goal in the education system should be to ensure that our schools are trauma-informed, such that we recognize and respond to the impact of trauma and its effects on staff, students, families, communities, and the system at large. In this section on the website, you'll notice that we provided considerations and reflection questions to guide schools when responding to a death using a trauma-informed approach. You'll see that we've provided considerations. For example, do not assume students have been traumatized by what has happened. Be mindful of the language in your communications to the school community. And also how to guide the school back to a normal routine. We've also included a section on memorializations. We know that some boards have already begun to look at this, and some have even changed their practices. We provide some considerations on how to best balance being compassionate with the primary role of the school. Our aim is to always strive to treat all deaths in a way that is fair and equitable. It's very easy to lead and respond with our hearts, but we must reflect on what is sustainable over time and consider all of our students and the impact on them. In this section, there's also some recommendations around considerations for when it's death by suicide. The main point that we'd like to make on this is that we want to make sure that all boards do adhere to their suicide prevention and intervention protocols, as that always would trump, but that we do have to be mindful around making sure that we treat all deaths equitably.
And we've also made reference to some Catholic resources for responding to death by suicide as well. Much of the website is containing documents that will help schools develop and support a pastoral plan for responding to a bereavement, which is orchestrated by school administration. While all staff have a role in the plan, we know that everyone takes guidance from the principal or their designate, so we have a section specifically for them. Board staff may also be called in to support school administrators, and so we've also taken consideration of what their role might be. And we've provided these considerations to chaplains, religion consultants, and other school staff as well. The purpose of this is to complement what is in the board's crisis response guideline, not to override it. It is always important that the board's protocols and procedures are followed. So if we go to the pastoral plan section, you'll see that in addition to the main page, there is also a number of sub-pages. And it is important to remember that during times of crisis or bereavement, all staff in the school walk alongside the community and are with the community, and people in different roles may take on different tasks. And these might include prayer and reflection, providing for the physical needs of the bereaved, just to be present, and also pedagogy, helping students to understand what death means and how we can support one another through that. And of course, as Catholics, we always uphold the role of the faith community as a source of strength in times of challenge. So at this point, I'd like to take a closer look at this section and go directly to the Google site. So when you first get to the Pastoral Plan section, you'll see this page on accompaniment, because the role of those who enact a pastoral plan is to accompany the bereaved. So on this page, if you click on the image, you will be taken to a document that gives you some considerations for developing your pastoral plan at school level. And then up here, there are a number of sub-pages which speak to the role of various individuals in enacting the plan. So we have a sub-page for chaplains and religion consultants that talks about what the role is and provides a number of possible tasks and considerations when taking on that task. So part of what maybe a brand new religion consultant or chaplain might do is to familiarize themselves with the policies and procedures in the crisis response document and the school board suicide protocol. And it goes on to list other tasks that it might be. It talks about being prepared to support with age-appropriate activities, many of which can be found in this resource. It also talks about being taking a break, being someone who practices self-care, and provides a link to tips for caregivers. And this link is found in a number of places throughout the resource, because it's really important that our caretakers take care of themselves first and foremost. Michelle, what you always say about putting on your oxygen mask?
Oxygen mask, yeah.
And so, so this tab here provides guidance for school administrators who are responsible for enacting the pastoral plan. It refers to them to various board protocols, including the crisis response document, and considerations that they might want to take as they enact. They plan to share information, verify information, make sure that they have consent, assessing the situation and what kind of response might be needed, enacting a staff meeting and sharing the news with the community, and so on. It gives considerations for supporting the community on an ongoing basis in the days after the bereavement. So this will be a very useful document for our school principals. So this is the communications tab, which is intended for school administrators who have the unfortunate responsibility of sharing the news of a bereavement. General considerations have been offered, and suggestions for embedding a faith perspective into the communications is also provided. Our exemplars allow principals to see how they can communicate the language in an age-appropriate way for students, as well as we have provided considerations for doing this in a culturally sensitive manner. We have recommended that administrators consult with appropriate board staff, which might include the communications manager and the mental health lead. It's important to note that our exemplars are not meant to be a one-size-fits-all offering. These need to be adapted to the circumstances that exist. There's a tab here for comforting the grieving, which is a big part of what our pastoral plan will be about. So there is a suggestion for how we can create a safe space for grieving community members, and for rituals and practices that comfort in a way that is sensitive to the cultural diversity of our schools. Very often we set up chapels, for example, for our bereaved students to gather, maybe without thinking that some of our non-Catholic students, non-Christian students, may not feel comfortable gathering in the chapel as their space to grieve. So there's a suggestion of other places in this school and how those might be set up as an alternative space for our students. Other considerations are also provided for supporting grieving students in a way that honors and respects their diversity. And it is suggested that in the event that we are supporting a non-Christian group of students, or in the death of a student who is not Christian, that we might want to reach out to the local faith leaders, such as the local imam or rabbi, for guidance on practices that might comfort these students, and how we can honor those traditions within our Catholic schools. This section of the page looks at the role that school staff can play in supporting bereaved students. There's a number of considerations for how the classroom teacher, or even an EA or a guidance counselor, might be able to support in those moments after students have received the news that a member of the community has passed away. So we can click on this and come up with an activity or two, or some thoughts for what we can offer as a member of the school staff. And there's a link to a page of additional suggestions in here. Finally, this page offers some guidelines on how older students might be able to support their classmates and friends who have suffered a loss. And this can be used by teachers to look at practices that they might develop and adapt for their situation, to help students who are wanting to be kind friends and supportive friends in the days after and months and weeks after a loss in the classroom. So the next page we'd like to draw to your attention is classroom activities for K-8. On this page, there are some just general activities for classroom use when the news of a loss has been shared. And then we have some direct curriculum connections to our religion and family life program. So teachers may wish to look at where those have been embedded into the curriculum.
Kelly, would you mind scrolling down a little bit, please?
Okay.
So the other resources that we'd like to bring your attention to are the two links at the bottom. The one on the left is the resource from the Eastern Ontario Catholic Curriculum Corporation, who released this update resource that highlights and addresses mental health and wellness for Catholic schools. In this resource, if you're not familiar with it already, they provide lesson plans for K, grade 1, grade 3, 4, 6, and 8. And in this resource, if you're familiar with it, you'd also see that they do reference the resource on the right as well. So the resource on the right is the Faith and Wellness Everyday Mental Health Practice resource from School Mental Health Ontario. And when you click on this resource, there are lesson plans, already ready to use lesson plans for teachers from K-8 that cover topics like stress management and coping, identifying and management of emotions, perseverance and motivation, identity. And each of these lessons, when you go into the Faith and Wellness link, provide the Catholic curriculum connections for you as well. And as you'll see, they were also co-created with OECTA.
We also took a look at what supporting bereavement looked like in our grade 9 to 12 classrooms, and we provided some considerations for our secondary school staff. So we started with some considerations for starting the conversation with bereaved teens and looking how the experience of a loss may impact teens socially, behaviorally, and the changes that might be typical. And then we provided some links to other resources, as well as just general considerations. For example, modeling a faith practice, starting the class with a brief prayer or meditation, and showing what supports you when you are struggling. And then we have links to these activities, these resources here.
And the second part of this page in supporting secondary students is we totally can recognize that sometimes in your role as an educator, it's not as comfortable, or sometimes we don't know what to say and what words to say in terms of how to help support students who are having difficulty coping with whatever loss it is they've gone through. And so what School Mental Health Ontario has provided and what we've linked here for you are some examples of ways that you can start the conversation. They use the ABC model, where A stands for acknowledge, B stands for bridge, and C stands for connect. That way, when you know that you're intervening and starting the conversation, that you can kind of help bring the student along in their path. So this first chart are conversation starter examples to acknowledge, bridge, and connect. That could be good for all students, like a classroom-wide conversation, for example. And then the second chart that Kelly's scrolling down to are specific things that you might say specifically to the students who are maybe struggling a little bit more than the rest of the class. So you would use these conversation starters to address their feelings, to still be able to acknowledge, bridge, and connect, but really recognizing that these students are a little bit more upset and a little bit more struggling with the process. So this is to help educators out who are sometimes not sure what to say, not sure how to approach a student. These are just some lines that you can use to get that conversation opened up.
And then the final subpage of our pastoral plan section is books and resources. And here are a number of bereavement titles, picture books that support. These are different than the ones in the other section that came with lesson plans. This is just a list of books that and a brief description of the book and how it deals with or connects to the idea of death and loss. There's also a list of some DVDs and other resources and online resources. Now, these are things that are available on the internet, and Michelle is going to speak specifically about a couple of them.
So some of these resources that we've included here are tip sheets or information sheets that are also pulled from the School Mental Health Ontario website. And so some of these are good for you to use for your own use, and some of them are even good to share with parents, for example, or with students. The first one is about loss, grief, and bereavement, specifically during the COVID pandemic. As everyone's aware now that we've been in this for over a year, we're not able to do a lot of our traditions that we're used to doing. And so that adds to some people's trauma and to their process of grief. And so some of the tips on this information sheet specifically address these differences. And the second one is more for educators around tragic events that are more accidental kinds of situations, or natural disasters or violence, or for example, a suicide, how to deal with that tragic event with your classroom. So again, in conjunction, if it is a death by suicide, in conjunction with your suicide protocol, intervention protocol, some of these tips for educators on just how to deal with it when it is a little bit more of a wider scale tragic event. Are there some tips in there for you?
We'd also like to draw your attention to the Children and Youth Grief Network, which provides a 4-module course for parents, adults, educators, any person who might be supporting children who are bereaved. And so this resource could be, for example, shared with a family who has experienced a loss, so that they can learn to help support their children. And the final section of our Google site is the role of prayer. So here we have 3 subsection prayers, prayer services, and music playlists. So in the prayer section, we have considerations for cultural sensitivity. So here are a number of prayers and reflections from various faith traditions, and also guidance for those who are supporting a multicultural community. So again, reaching out to faith leaders, for example, in other faith traditions who might be able to provide guidance, as well as prayers that you can use in your announcements, for example, if the person who's passed away is non-Catholic. There are as well some Catholic prayers. Some of these come from the Catholic rites that are associated with death and burial. And finally, there's a tab with some reflections on death and loss that are sort of more secular and can be used in a variety of circumstances. In the prayer services section, we have a guide to planning bereavement liturgies, an outline for what a prayer service might look like, as well as a couple of sample prayer services provided in the form of a Google slide deck. These are also in the folder in PowerPoint form, available from the Catholic Curriculum Corporation website. There is a bit of a script that you can follow that's linked from the slide deck. And one of them is for younger students, and the other is for older students and staff. And then we have 2 prayer services provided in a pamphlet form where technology may not be readily accessible. So again, there's one for younger students and one for staff or older students. So those are ready to go in the case where you need something to grab and go so that you can support that community. And finally, we've provided a music playlist, a suggested list of hymns and traditional songs that might be used for playing as background music in a chapel or a gathering area where staff are bereaved, or these could also be linked into the slide decks. And we have provided a reminder that at all times we follow copyright rules for presenting songs to a congregation. So just a reminder of that. So that basically ends our run through of our Google site and all of the resources that are available to you online on this Google site or in a folder on the Catholic Curriculum Corporation website. And we hope that all of you who are in the unfortunate situation of supporting students at a time of loss will find them to be helpful and supportive in your role. And we hope that this will allow us as a Catholic community to really support those students, because we know that we teach the whole child, and a child who is coping with a loss, we need to address that before we can move on with the learning. So thank you very much for your time and for joining us today to learn more about how we as a Catholic community can be a source of comfort and strength during times of loss.
Thank you, everyone. Be well.